Hi, I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story. Say, if you already have a pretty solid brand story, but your people don't really know how to tell it very well, give me a call. You will benefit from my 35 plus years in brand crafting and business storytelling to help you and your sales and marketing people make your brand story sing. Now, I'm not here to rebrand you or even refine what you have already created, although I can do that too. I'm really here to help you tell your story the way your ideal customers will take note and swarm to your business like bees to honey. If you're proud of your brand story but frustrated that your salespeople are not connecting and converting customers, it's probably an easy fix. Give me a call or shoot me a note to park@businessofstory.com. Today, we're going to explore the science of storytelling with the author of a new book by the same name, Will Storr. But first, your story marketing moment. Do you find your sales and marketing people, despite their best intentions, are winging your brand story rather than winning with it? They mean well, but they're just not clear about how to tell it. They're using their intuition rather than being intentional about using proven themes and storytelling frameworks to captivate your customers. So I got to admit, I was winging my sales for my masterclasses and keynotes for the Business of Story. It was working, but not nearly as effective as I learned that it could be. Then I met an amazing sales strategist, Alice Hyman. She brought a whole new spirit to my sales through intentionality. I mean, it's the same thing I coach in being intentional about telling your brand stories. I wasn't being intentional about following a proven strategy for my own sales. But I got lucky because Alice took one of my Build a Better brand story sprints, and I was helping her craft her brand story. And in return, she is now helping me craft my sales strategy. And I could not have been blessed with a better person to help me because Alice was basically raised in sales as the daughter of the legendary sales guru, Stephen Hyman of Miller Hyman. Alice recommended, actually compelled me to read her dad's book, Strategic Selling. Strategic Selling is one of the first best-selling books on selling. And even though it was published in the 1980s, it is more relevant today than ever. What struck me about strategic selling is that it follows a very similar framework to my story cycle system of establishing your unique position, identifying your key audiences, they call them buyer influencers in the book, what's at stake for them, how to shake them out of status quo thinking, obstacles and antagonists, etc. It's a timeless framework, just like the story cycle system, that will take your people from winging it to winning it. And I can't think of a better combination of books for you to get right now than Strategic Selling and, of course, my book, Brand Bewitchery. Both can be found on Amazon, iBooks, and anywhere popular books are being sold. Evolving from an intuitive to an intentional storyteller starts by understanding why and how stories work to connect with, captivate, and convert your customers. That's why I'm eager for you to hear from today's guest, Will Storr.
If you think about your favorite stories, what's in the center of them is usually a really fascinating character. And the fascinating character is specifically put in a situation that challenges the core of who they are and gets them to ask the question, who am I? And who do I need to be in order to actually survive this problem that's now facing me? So that's addictively interesting to most humans because we are designed to be fascinated with the minds of other people because that's how we survive. That's how we play the game of life.
Will is an award-winning writer and author of 5 critically acclaimed books, including the novel The Hunger and The Howling of Killian Lone. His journalism has appeared in The Guardian, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. Will has won the National Press Club Award for Excellence and the AFM Award for Best Investigative Journalism. He teaches popular storytelling classes in London and has been invited to present his Science of Storytelling workshop all over the world. So let's explore how understanding why stories work will help you and your sales team go from winging it to winning it with your brand storytelling. Please welcome to the Business of Story, Will Storr. Will, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Park. I really appreciate it.
Where are you coming to us from?
I'm coming to you from the southeast of England, about an hour southeast of London.
Well, I first learned about your book from a guest I had on my show about a month ago, Matthew Woodgett, and he was just raving about it. And be honest with you, Will, I have read so many books on storytelling and the science of storytelling that I put them down and I thought, well, do I want to give this one a try? Because is it just going to say all the other things the other one said too? And I was really fascinated by it. I thought you did a brilliant job with it. And so thanks for taking the time, because I wanted to share your insights on the book with our listeners.
No, thank you. That's great to hear. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Park.
Now, my first question is, why did you write the book?
So it's got a bit of a weird genesis, the book. I've been writing about psychology as a journalist for, more than 10 years now. And I published a book called The Unpersuadables. And The Unpersuadables was this investigation into, why do smart people end up believing crazy things? How does that happen? And so that was my investigation. And the answer that I came up with, once I interviewed the scientist, interviewed Jonathan Haidt, who I know that you've had on your show, did all the research. And the story that the kind of answer that I came up with was essentially the brain is a storyteller, and that we're very vulnerable to believing anything which flatters our kind of personal view of ourselves. And that's what sort of why smart people end up believing mad things, is because we're all vulnerable to believing things that make us kind of feel heroic. So after that, I thought that was interesting. And as a writer, I just thought, well, maybe, instead of reading all those storybooks, which as you could say, often just end up saying the same thing, maybe I can start looking into kind of psychology to find out how to be a better writer. And then that ended up being a course. I used to run a course, The Science of Storytelling, at the Guardian newspaper. And then that course became the book. So it's kind of very roundabout thing. So the book is based on the course that pre-COVID, I was teaching at the Guardian.
Mm-hmm. And you call it the science of storytelling. And to me, there was kind of two parts to that science. You had the neuroscience of what makes it work, and then sort of the mechanical science of here's what you do as a writer to be able to hack into these neural pathways and connect with your audience on a very Homo sapien level. Is that a fair way of describing it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I didn't want to kind of fall into the trap of just nerding out and writing loads of stuff about fascinating scientific principles and discoveries. I wanted this to be a book that was genuinely useful because, I've read lots of the storybooks and some of them are great, but some storybooks I think fall into the trap of, in a way they seem to be there more to show off the authors how many books they've read. There's just endless examples of this book and that book. But then other books are kind of I felt they were a bit kind of too precise to give you such a precise kind of recipe in terms of how to tell a story that it kind of kills any kind of creative joy that you might have out of the process. So I kind of wanted to do something that was in between.
I got you. I want to explore with you, since you have done 10 years as a journalist studying the psychology of story and so forth. So many people, quote unquote, smart people, scientists, push back on this idea of the neuroscience of story, saying that we just still really don't understand how it works. And I'm curious what your response to that would be.
Well, yeah, so there's a bit of neuroscience in my book, but most of it is psychology. I kind of agree that I think often claims from neuroscience, especially in the pop scientific book kind of realm, are a bit overblown because we're still very early in what we know about the brain. And generally, studies from neuroscience kind of show where activity is happening in the brain with kind of increased blood flow. And then we draw some suppositions from that. There isn't that much useful you can draw from neuroscience. So I think the preponderance of the book really it's from two different realms of psychology, really. There's social psychology and there's also evolutionary psychology. So it's a mixture of kind of all three disciplines. And I think that when you combine social psychology evolutionary psychology and neuroscience together, then you really begin to get, a fascinating picture of storytelling, and a new picture, I think, as well. One that kind of starts off in a different place from traditional kind of exercises in trying to sort of work out the secrets of storytelling.
And I think that's one of the things that surprised me most about your book right up top. And I suppose you were tapping into my curiosity when you were talking about how we all are making up our own existence and fabricating these fictions that are our lives by what we take in as stimulus and how our brain then processes that. You make the point of saying, you stub your toe at night, your toe's not actually hurting, your brain is just telling you a story that it's hurting. And I can totally relate to that because I get sciatica down my right side at night. And I'm like, is that really something, or is it just my brain messing with me? So I was fascinated about that. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you started your book with this really deep sort of psychological look at how we kind of just make up the stories in our lives and placing us as the hero at the center of that story. Fact or fiction? And it seems like from your position, it's mostly fiction that we're making up.
Yeah, so the reason I start there is because I think the big sort of light bulb moment for me in understanding this stuff was, especially in terms of storytelling, is that you kind of grow up thinking and being taught really that storytelling is something that was invented by writers. It was William Shakespeare or some Greek dude, 100,000 years ago worked out, or Charlotte Bronte worked out how to tell a story, and that's how stories work. And actually what we know now from the science is that isn't true. Of course, these people, were great at the kind of art of and practice of telling stories. But what storytellers do is they mimic the way the brain processes the world. So the world as we experience it is literally a story. That's not just like a cool trendy kind of TED talk soundbite. It's literally true. True reality is overwhelmingly complicated. We don't even experience true reality on a basic level. For example, our eyes pick up less than 1/10 trillionth of the available light spectrum. Colors in the real world don't exist. Colors are a special effect painted by the brain. Atoms around us have no color. What happens is that light waves hit the senses, and depending on the length of the light wave, the brain just decides to make that a pink or a blue or a green or a red. Sounds don't exist outside the brain. Sounds are shifting vibrations in the ground and shifting kind of air waves. So it's literally a story. There's a very famous neuroscientist called Professor Chris Frith who says that one of the brain's principal roles is to make us feel like the invisible actor at the center of the world. And that's how it feels to be alive. We're at the center of the world. Everybody else in the world are kind of relegated to the realm of supporting cast. They're kind of allies or villains or just not worth thinking about. It all relates to us, to us, and that's where the social psychology comes in. I think really, all these, there are so many biases that people have, very powerful biases that people have that kind of bend us into making us feel like we're heroic. Like in the Western part of the world, these biases tend to be around individual excellence because we live in individualistic cultures who make heroes of individual heroes that kind of go and fight monsters and save the world. And there are these crazy statistics that say things like that find things like 94% of university professors think they're above average, which is obviously statistically impossible. The bias is about individual kind of ability, kind of skew Western, because that's what we value over here in the West much more than in more communitarian cultures where they value the group and they have kind of heroic feelings about their place in the group more than we do. But what's universal is the virtue stuff. Social scientists believe that the most powerful bias that we have is that we think that we are good people. So the story generally goes, yes, I've made mistakes. Yes, I have regrets, but I'm essentially a good person. I'm a morally good person. And the people who experience the world different from me are morally bad people, and they're evil and deserve to be punished. And this is a sort of major part of what I call the hero-making brain. If you don't think you're a good person and you don't want to be a good person, you're either very severely clinically depressed or you're a sociopath or a psychopath. I mean, you can't be functionally healthy and normal without having that kind of bias in place. So you can see how the stories that we tell reflect the way the brain works and the way the brain processes our life. So that's where I wanted to start. I wanted to start, okay, well, if the ultimate storyteller is the brain and is the experience of being conscious, then let's start there instead of starting with, King Lear or whatever the traditional, text would be that you might start with.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. So I guess if I was going to unpack that for myself, and correct me if I'm missing this, essentially we are all walking around with a theater of our own minds. So our mind is a theater, and we are making up these stories, placing us, of course, at the center of that story, because that's a pure survival technique, right? I mean, I suppose you look into
Yeah.
social or evolutionary psychology is, if I'm going to live, I better pay attention to me first. I mean, that's why we put on our oxygen masks first on the airplane if it's going down, right? And then take care of everybody else. So in your book, in storytellers are about, how do we enter into the theater of the mind of that person sitting across from us, from their perspective, from the way they see the world, and then share stories in these patterns that make it easy for the brain to digest it, invite it in, and essentially we are trying to weave our story in with their story.
Yeah, that's correct. And there are kind of two levels to that, really, especially in the business context. So, in the business context, the first thing I think is important to think about is just the basic kind of structural stuff, like how does the brain tell a story and why does the brain tell a story? And I think there are two sort of basic principles of storytelling that are really useful in the business context. And the first one is cause and effect. So humans think in causes and effects. So something happens, we direct our attention to it, and we immediately ask the question, what caused that and what's going to happen next? And so one of the studies that they've done looking at this compares us with our closest relative, evolutionarily speaking, the chimpanzee. And when they compare chimpanzee behavior to infant child behavior, they give them these wooden blocks to stack upright. And the wooden blocks have these lead weights hidden in them in funny places, which means they fall down. And the difference between the humans and the chimpanzees is the chimpanzees just keep trying to stack them and they keep falling down and they just keep at it. But the infant children, and these are pre-verbal children, so they're very young children, they pick up the blocks and they start examining the blocks and they're asking, what caused that? How can I stop that happening in the future? So this cause and effect is a really fundamental way that we understand the world, and that's how story is structured. The beginning of a compelling story, something surprising happens, often in the first sentence, and that draws the attention of the reader. And then begins this kind of cause and effect kind of pattern. So the most obvious would be a murder mystery where it begins with a surprising incident of a body washing up on the shore or in a forest or somewhere, and then the detective inspector rolls up to ask the question, who done it, who killed this person, and you go on this kind of cause and effect journey. So that's really how good stories are structured. And speaking as a writer is easier said than done. You think, oh yeah, but that's obvious.
Mhm.
But actually, when you try and write stories in a cause and effect style, so this thing happens, which causes this thing, and that causes the next thing, and that causes the next thing, is actually quite difficult and takes quite a bit of work. But that's the basic language of the brain. And if you want to really engage people in your story, it's really important to stick to that cause and effect. So the difference might be, mass market storytelling like Jaws. If you look at the story like Jaws, it's completely cause and effect. People start dying, so they close the beach. So they don't close the beach, but then more people die, so they do close the beach. So then he goes out to attack the shark. It's effortless watching because one thing leads to the next, and there's no struggle. And you compare that to like an art house movie or a very literary, kind of Victorian novel where the cause and effect might be broken down, where something happens and then the next thing you're somewhere else, and then the next minute you're somewhere else, and you're having to consciously work out how one thing connects with the other. And that's when you're having conversations with your friends, like saying, well, I think the director meant this by this. Well, I think the director meant this by it. And we often call that kind of storytelling hard work. And we call it hard work because it is hard work. We're having to do the hard cognitive work of working out what the hell's going on. So that cause and effect is really important. And the second thing I think is kind of essential in the business context is simplicity. I mean, one of the core reasons why the brain makes a story out of reality, we don't have the capacity to understand true reality. The reality of the world is way too complex for us to grasp. So we simplify it. We like a few years ago over here in the UK, we had the Brexit vote. And I mean, Jesus, voting on whether the UK should be part of the European Union is such a complex question that only really economists, specialist economists, could answer, is it a good idea for us to do this or not? We didn't know. So we vote on the basis of the story that we tell ourselves about the EU and what it means. And that's what people did. And the successful campaign, the Leave campaign, tapped into that story much better than the Remain campaign. So it's really about that simplicity. I think it's quite well understood that very often business communication falls at that stage. It leans towards jargon, it leans towards complexity, and actually I think the work of a successful writer, a successful storyteller, is always pushing towards that maximal simplicity.
Yeah, well, in my career in the branding marketing world, and I've been at it over 35 years now, always found my job, number one, was to take a complex brand narrative and boil it down to its simplest core story. And about 8 years ago, I came across this tool called the and button therefore, or the ABT, and it was created by Randy Olson. And Randy Olson has become a great friend of mine. He is a Harvard PhD evolutionary biologist turned filmmaker, went to USC, graduated, produced 3 documentaries on climate change and global warming, but has written now, I think, 5 books on science communication and what he learned in storytelling through Hollywood, and how he can help scientists do a better job. And he boils it down to this ABT, the and button therefore. And he and I have been working closely together with some others over the last year, working with a lot of scientists on this ABT. You proof it out in your book. I mean, just this cause and effect and this idea of simplicity. And I sent him a note earlier today about, look, in Will's book, he's talking about the term and then confuses the brain, and then, and, because it's all exposition, that you need to have the because, or in the case of the ABT, or the but. So what happens? And so the way we use this ABT is, you want this and it's important because of this, but you don't have it because of this. Therefore, here's what we can do to help you get it, from a basic brand standpoint. So when I shared a couple of quotes from your book this morning in text with him, he immediately pushed back and started railing against any book that's, is the science of storytelling, because he says, like you did at the beginning of this, is that the neuroscience just hasn't proven itself that this works. So I texted him back and I said, okay, so is the ABT magic, or does it actually trigger some sort of neurochemical reaction that makes it work? And I haven't heard back from him, but I want to pose that question to you too. This cause and effect thing, this simplicity, does it trigger some sort of neurochemicals that we can pinpoint that says this is why it works in our brains, or is it still kind of magic because we simply don't quite understand it yet?
As I said before, I'd be reluctant to get caught up on neuroscience, because neuroscience is only a part of this story, and it's and it's out of the 3 parts of science, you've evolution psychology, social psychology, and neuroscience. It's the smallest piece of the puzzle. So I would agree with your friend. If the book was called The Neuroscience of Storytelling, I would treat it with some suspicion, but that's certainly not what it is. And so the cause and effect thing, I talked about the study with the chimpanzees and the infant humans. If you read Daniel Kahneman, a very famous social psychologist, his book Thinking Fast and Slow, I use an example from there in the book, which he gets people to look at the word bananas and then look at the word vomit. And consciously or unconsciously, your brain connects bananas and vomit and think that the bananas have caused this sickness. And of course, they haven't. They're just 2 words. But because the brain thinks in causes and effects, cause and effect, we can't help but make that connection. So we do know that we kind of build our story of the world through causes and effects. It's well understood. It's well proven, not by me, but by Nobel Prize winning Daniel Kahneman. So.
And in the business world, that's what we're all about. You buy our product and it's going to affect you this way.
Of course,
but you've got to do the setup of why is this important, and understand what's happening in the theater of the mind of that customer and what's at stake for them. That's the and part. But here's why you don't have it, or here's what's going on that is keeping you from it. Therefore, I have a solution for you, a cause and effect outcome, and you paint the picture of what tomorrow can look like. So to me, it's like a no-brainer. It works unbelievably well. And I am still trying to dig down into why does it work? But I think you've kind of covered some of that here. You had mentioned 2 levels in business. So you've got the structural, how and why the brain tells a story. We talked about cause and effect and simplicity. Was there a second part to that? Was there another level?
So that's looking at the kind of social psychology of it all, and really understanding, as you said a moment ago, that from the business point of view, the crucial thing is understanding not your own story so much as as the story that the people that you're trying to influence, the story that they're telling about the world. Because that's what you're trying to connect with. If you go into that negotiation or that sales pitch thinking you're the hero in that situation, I think you're going to kind of fall over. And it's really about understanding, what the person that you're trying to communicate with wants, and understanding their story of the world and speaking in a language that their kind of story connects with.
And this leads to this concept of theory of mind, which I had not heard of before. Can you talk a little bit about theory of mind and how we so get it wrong most of the time?
Yeah, this is an extraordinary set of work. I mean, again, theory of mind is a very well-known sort of concept among psychologists and neuroscientists. So we have theories about the minds of the other people in our lives. So we have these models of other people in our head. So if you were to kind of close your eyes now and imagine, telling, I don't know if you've got a wife or a partner, but telling your long-term partner that you're not going to come home this evening, that you're going to fly to Las Vegas and, empty the joint account and gamble and have some fun. And you can imagine what she would say to you. If you really concentrate, you can hear her voice. And what you're doing then is that's your theory of your partner's mind being activated. That's your model of their mind that's being activated. You're predicting how they're going to react. And so that's a kind of an essential component of how we negotiate the social world. We all walk around with these models of other people inside our heads. In people suffering from psychosis and schizophrenia, it's these mechanisms that go haywire. I, a few years ago, interviewed a person who used to hear voices, and tragically, one of the voices he heard was the voice of the Catholic priest that abused him as a child, and he'd hear this voice literally as if it was in the room with him, and no different, insulting him and taunting him, and so they're very kind of powerful kind of mechanisms. They're the same mechanisms that come alive when we read a novel or we watch a movie. So if you watch Mad Men, or if you've seen Mad Men, you've got a model of Don Draper in your head. If you're a fan of the show, you can probably summon up that model at will, get him to talk, imagine what he's going to say in certain situations. So that's and when we're reading a novel, the storyteller has to get across in a shorter space as possible enough kind of information that we can start building an accurate model of that character in our minds, because then they come alive. And there's some interesting stuff in the research literature where they interview novelists, and some novelists have such powerful theory of mind processes, I suppose you might call it, that they actually start to hear the voices of their characters in their heads, and the voices of their characters start telling them what's going to happen next in the book. So it's a kind of an essential components of storytelling, and as you say, it often goes wrong. When they actually study how accurate our theories of mind are, it's frighteningly bad.
It's like 80% wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Even with loved ones, it's 70%. So we're often wrong about our predictions of other people, and in the business, again, that's where your research comes in, and it's so important. If you're a Democrat, not to go in with all your biases and prejudices about Trump voters, because you know what, they're probably going to be wrong. So if you're wanting to communicate with people that aren't like you, it's extremely important to get that research done well, and to be respectful, and to go in open-minded and genuinely interested in how they see the world, and not kind of biased against them in any way.
Yeah, that's where the personas come in, customer personas, but going in and asking the right questions and what motivates them, and really talking to them. And as you said, being very open-minded so that you can actually see what's hopefully, or at least perceive what's happening in the theater of their mind, so you know what stories to tell to help connect them. A lot of people would think that's very manipulative, and yet the brands and the businesses we work with are very purpose driven, meaning they're selling something and they got to make money to stay in business, but it's for a bigger cause. It's for helping people and helping society and that sort of thing. But if you're going to have that kind of impact, you got to really understand the theory of mind of your customer or your audience or your NGO or whomever that is. Walk them on their shoes, right?
Yeah, and that word manipulative, I mean, it's very kind of morally drenched. It's very kind of value laden, and but and to that, my response would be, if you want to tackle climate change, and you want to change the minds of people who at the moment just don't care about recycling, or whatever it might be, you want to change their minds on, how else are you going to tackle climate change without being, in quotes, manipulative? Everybody is in the business of manipulation. With every social interaction they have, we want people to like us, we want people to work well with us, we want to get our way. Yes, you can throw that word around. I think it's sort of rather naive and, as I say, a bit value laden. If you want to make the world a better place, you better start learning how to manipulate and not feel bad about it, because if we want to change behavior, we need to take these problems seriously.
Well, in your book, too, you talk about, and I guess this comes from the social and evolutionary psychology side of it, that all Homo sapiens want to get along and get ahead. So you have these contradictory sort of forces, like get along is here. I'm here to help you selflessly do what and get whatever you want. But we always have an eye just over their shoulder to say, but I also want to get ahead of you.
Yeah, and again, that's from the evolutionary psychology side of things, which I think is fascinating from a storytelling perspective. And so in the millions of years in which our brains were being designed by evolution, we were living in mostly mobile hunter-gatherer bands, and so our brains are still specialized for the Stone Age. Our brains haven't evolved significantly, or if at all, kind of since then. So in order to kind of manage life in those Stone Age kind of hunter-gatherer bands, yeah, as you say, we would have to make sure that we're connecting in with our group. So people got to be think sort of well of us, and we've got to be seen as pro-social, selfless, helpful, all those things. But once you're in that group, most people aren't satisfied sort of lolling about on the bottom rungs of their social group. They want to get ahead. They want to get along. They want to get up. They want to be respected. They want to be more than just liked. They want to be admired. And again, that has very easy to understand evolutionary roots. The Darwinian aim of every living thing is to survive and reproduce. And in hunter-gatherer groups, like in every human group, the more status you have, the more access to preferred mates you have, the more resources you have, the safer your sleeping sites, the better fed you are. So in order to thrive, in order to kind of survive, you have to connect. But in order to thrive, you have to earn status. You have to get ahead. So yeah, we humans are this very, as you say, quite uncomfortable combination of these two kind of urges to kind of get along with people and be liked and I guess be seen as morally good, but also to get ahead of them, to win status. We see those tensions in the business world, very clearly with the tension between wanting to change the world and make it a better place and all those things, but also wanting to win, wanting to be the most profitable, the most successful. And again, I don't think this is anything that we should feel bad about because it's human nature. It's who we are.
In your book, too, you wrote, in this 21st century of speed, information, and high technology, we still have Stone Age brains. And I equate that to the Flintstones meet the Jetsons. And I don't know if you know that American cartoon.
Sure. Yeah. I used to watch the Flintstones.
Yeah, they came out of the same group. I think it's Hanna-Barbera. So you got the Stone Age Flintstones, and then they jump way ahead into the future Jetsons. And that quote or your line reminded me of that idea of here we are with this brilliant neocortex that is able to create all this fabulous technology, allow us to think very, very complex thoughts, to be able to push massive amounts of communication out from our kitchen table 24/7 from the palm of our hand. And yet you and I and everyone else is still walking around with essentially this limbic system, this Stone Age brain that has not appreciably changed since our ancestors were navigating and surviving the savannah. We're still using it to navigate and survive technology, the internet, and how we communicate today. At the core of that, and this is a question I've never been able to ask anyone, and I thought this is perfect for you. So, story at the very beginning in these tribal confines we found ourselves back in primitive age, it was all about gossip. So we were gossiping, learning about that person sitting across the campfire in the cave from us. Are they good? Are they bad? Do they help the clan? Do they not? Do we need to push them out? And it was all gossip. Well, that gossip is still very much, that gossip gene is very much in us today. But why? Then when we are being, brought up, for the most part, our parents are saying, Park, stop gossiping. It's not nice to gossip. Don't gossip about that person when it is so apparently innate in us Homo sapiens.
That's right. So gossiping is universal. They find it everywhere you go in the world. Men and women gossip a similar amount, but the only difference is in the genders that men stop gossiping for some reason when there are women around. Then they gossip between themselves, but not in earshot so much of other women. Children begin to do kind of primitive forms of gossip. Almost as soon as they can talk, they start telling tales and talking about other people's kind of moral behavior. This person did this person did that. So yeah, it's universal. And it's a very good question about why it's seen as a bad thing. I've not seen any research on that, but I have thought about it, and my kind of supposition is that gossip is extremely dangerous. It's a very dangerous thing to engage in. Back in the hunter-gatherer era, it's thought that execution was universal at one point in our history. So what would happen? The kind of sequence would be that somebody would be behaving in a way that was considered immoral in that group. The gossip would start, and the gossip leads to moral outrage, and the moral outrage leads to people correcting the behavior. They get furious and they try to correct the behavior of the deviant, and they do that in one of a small variety of ways. It begins with social distancing, that you don't get greeted in the way that you believe you should. People start avoiding you, or teasing and humiliation. And if that doesn't work, perhaps ostracization, you're kicked out of the tribe, which would be an effective death sentence, because without the clan, you couldn't live, or ultimately you're killed. So that's inside us still. That's what gossip leads to. And when we think about that Stone Age brain in the modern era, one of the things we can think about is social media, and we see all these. We see Stone Age life happening on social media every day. Gossip, outrage, punishment. Gossip, outrage, punishment. So gossip is extremely dangerous, and so careless gossip. Not only is that dangerous for other people, I think it can also probably redound on yourself if you're someone that is considered a person who is careless with gossip and deploys it unnecessarily and vindictively. I think you're going to very quickly get the reputation of a dangerous person. I suspect that's part of the answer of why it's seen as this, because we don't like to think of ourselves as gossips, and we don't like to think of our children as gossips. But as you say, we are.
Whether we like it or not, we can't.
Whether we like it or not,
we can't.
That's
keep
what
ourselves
newspapers are. That's what journalism is. Journalism is tribal gossip, but it's on the level of the nation rather than on the level of the tribe.
Well, if that's the case, then why does it have to be accurate?
It isn't.
I know. But, fake news came on the stage, of course, during the Trump era, and talking about moral outrage and disgust that triggered it. But if what you're saying is true, is it's all gossip, then it doesn't have to be true. Is that right?
I'm not sure about that. I think we've worked out as a species that it should be true because it's extremely dangerous. And I think for most of the era of journalism, the rule has been we will try and be fair and accurate. So even though newspapers divide along political lines and tell tribal gossip, they tell the story of the world from left or right, there was also a moral imperative, and speaking as somebody who's been a journalist for 20 years, to hear both sides of the story. And I think one of the terrible things about the internet era is that people no longer expect that quite so much, and this idea that a journalist should be a political activist is now becoming quite common. And I think on both sides of the aisle, in my view, we're seeing an extremely dangerous dereliction of that sort of basic journalist principle to tell both, at least try to tell both sides of the story. And I think the results we're seeing are entirely predictable, that we're getting an increasingly distorted negative view of the other side. And moral outrage is ramping up disproportionately as a direct result.
Yeah, you can really see that. That was one of the things that hit me in your book, is talking about moral outrage. I mean, in America, the last 4 years has just blown up, and I don't know how you get it, calmed down, of how you tamp that down again once this tribe has gotten to this point of such unbelievable political correctness and moral outrage. You are just so cautious about saying anything divisive anymore because you don't know who it's going to trigger.
But that's it, and it's frightening, because people are in such a kind of warlike state of moral outrage, and I really do think the lesser talked about causes of this is we have a crisis in storytelling, and people look at the media slightly contemptuously. Oh, it's just the media, but what they don't realize is the media plays an essential role in kind of mediating human society, because what it's done is it's taken over from tribal gossip. In the history of the world, what happened was when we broke out of our tribes and we started settling down, and communities became too big to be managed by gossip alone, we kind of invented religion. So the religions became moral. We had moralistic gods. And so suddenly you didn't need gossip anymore because you had this religious framework whereby people believed that if they did good or bad things, God would know and would see them. And then they would be punished in heaven or hell in the afterlife. And that sincere belief, it effectively took over from gossip because again, we feel like we're being watched and our behavior has serious consequences for us. But then, as Nietzsche said 100 years ago, God is dead. And in the West especially, we're not so religious anymore. So what happens is that the media takes over the role of religion. And that worked okay until very recently, because as I said, even though there was an understanding that there was a left and right wing media, there was still journalists took very seriously their role in telling the whole story. I mean, the Guardian newspaper over here, their advertising campaign 15 years ago was the whole story. And these days, the Guardian it's Fox News for the left. They make no serious attempt to tell the whole story. I really believe that, as a journalist, I've lived through it for 20 years as a journalist. I've seen the effect of the internet, people writing not to please their editors anymore, but to get clicks on the internet. And that incentivizes outrage. It incentivizes distortion. And as I say, I think that a lot of the problems that we're seeing at the moment is down to a crisis in storytelling.
Interesting. And these are all controlling constructs, using gossip early on in small tribes to control the group for the health and safety of the group, presumably. When it got too large, they argue at over 150 people, it starts getting out of control. And so religion starts to come in to become, but it doesn't really replace gossip because gossip is there throughout. It's just now an agreed upon controlling construct.
Yeah, gossip's in our brains.
Yeah.
We're never going to stop gossiping, and gossip still has a function in the smaller communities. And so, what the research suggests is that once cities got over 1 million, you would start seeing moral gods, and that never happened before. Before cities reached 1 million, our gods weren't moral; we were animists essentially. We believed that stones and trees had spirits in them, and we would leave sacrifices for them. But then suddenly, gods became moral because we needed a replacement for gossip because gossip wasn't working anymore. And being the imaginative geniuses we are, religion happened. And that's why, as I say, I think that we need to take the role of the media much more seriously when you see it in context of it replacing religion as our gossip network. I mean, what's our gossip network now? It's social media, and right. Religion, media takes its cues from social media. Journalists are led by the nose by social media. So, they're the same people. The people raising outrage on Twitter are the same people writing stories in the New York Times and the Guardian and whatever. It's terrible. I think it's a catastrophic. I think people don't understand how catastrophic this crisis in storytelling is becoming.
Well, let's bring it back down. My one last little segment I want to cover with you, because I think we've covered like about 9 different fantastic topics or episodes alone. But let's bring it back down to the individual, and we're trying to connect with that person sitting right across the table. Let's forget about the tribe and the group and the clan and the community. You say that regardless of plot, all story is about character, with this one fundamental question that is always rattling around in the back of our heads when we're watching something or we're interacting with somebody. We have that one question of, who is this person? What motivates and drives them? Would you mind just elaborating on that a little bit more? Is it really that simple? If that's what we're ultimately asking, is who is this person?
In that context, in the story context, I mean, so humans are, we're tribal animals, we're social animals, and in order to, we're not like animals that fight to survive. We're animals that negotiate and manipulate, to use that word again, to survive. So in order to, if you were an overly aggressive person in the tribe, you wouldn't last very long. So how we get along and get ahead is that we have to manipulate other people, and manipulating other people is a question of understanding who they are, understanding what drives them, what's going on in their heads. And that's part of what forms our gossip, trying to work out what's this person all about really. And I think some of the best, most compulsive storytelling is asking that question. I'd say most of it. If you think about your favorite stories, what's in the center of them is usually a really fascinating character, and the fascinating character is specifically put in a situation that challenges the core of who they are and gets them to ask the question, who am I? And who do I need to be in order to actually survive this this problem that is that's now facing me. So, and I think so that's addictively interesting to most humans because we are designed to be fascinated in the minds of with the minds of other people, because that's how we survive. That's how we play the game of life.
And is it like Lisa Cron said in her remarkable book, Wired for Story, that we get to try on their trouble to see what we would do in case it ever happens to us, and we get to do it from the safety of our easy chair? I mean, is it that the whole idea of what drives them?
That's it. I've never heard that idea before. That the idea is we're kind of practicing
It's a
having a
learning tool.
problem.
Yeah.
Perhaps. I mean, from my perspective, at least the research I did, it took me more down the route of surviving and thriving for a human is a matter of manipulating other people, small m manipulate, not in an evil way, but, trying to get what we want out of the world. We have to understand other people. But yeah, it's certainly, I wouldn't rule out that idea that you've just brought up, that we're kind of dress rehearsing problems for ourselves. That could well be part of the story.
Oh, interesting. Well, I mean, really a fascinating chat with you today, Will. If you had 2 or 3 ideas or things that you could share with our listeners in, business and growing their brands using story from your experience, from your studies of the 3 different sciences, social, evolutionary psychology, and a bit in the neuroscience, although we all agree it's in its infancy.
It's in its infancy.
What would be 2 or 3 things you might offer up to a business communicator to make them more powerful using story?
Okay, well, I think cause and effect is a really important one. One thing leading to another, because that's the language of the brain. That's how we understand our worlds, by thinking about how one thing leads to another. Number 2 would be simplicity. I'm a science journalist, and I have a policy of zero jargon if I can help it. There is no mention of amygdala or dopamine or serotonin in my books unless I have no choice, because so you're always trying to simplify, and really it's that I think great communication is emotional, and you can't do emotion without story. And the way I describe it is it's simplicity packed with meaning, and that's difficult. But that's some of the great brand, taglines. Just do it by Nike. It's simplicity. It's simple language. It's 3 syllables, but it's absolutely packed with meaning, and that's great storytelling. Sorry, that was probably about 5, wasn't it?
No, added value, man. Added value. We appreciate that. Well, Will, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Where can people learn more about you and find your book and the storytelling classes that you provide?
Well, the storytelling is off at the moment because the classes are off at the moment because of COVID. But I'm hoping to get them back on soon. The book is in the usual places, and on YouTube, if you Google my name, there are 5 short videos which stand as kind of an introduction to the science of storytelling.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you all for listening to this edition. If you liked what you heard, share it out with your friends, family, colleagues. If you are out there playing the whole theory of mind thing, remember, man, you're only about 20% accurate. So be very, very careful as you are trying to figure out what's happening on the other side of that noggin. If I can be of help to you, come on over to businessofstory.com. I've got plenty of tools, tips, techniques, and talent just like Will there that can help you craft and tell much more compelling stories that actually sell in the world out there. Join me next week when we will have another amazing story artist right here for you like Will. And until then, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.